Thanks for joining us here on 9 News Plus. I'm Chris Bianchi. Prop HH went down, failed spectacularly. That would have been the statewide tax overhaul that was prominently endorsed by Governor Jared Polis. That, one of the top-line takeaways from Tuesday's election night, also had some pretty dramatic results in some of the school board races. Aurora Mayor Mike Kaufman getting elected to a second term. So a lot of kind of interesting takeaways, and for more on those, we're now joined by 9 News' Kyle Clark here. Kyle, welcome to the box. And
good to be back in the box.
It's been a while.
It has been a while.
So, top-line takeaways, I think Prop HH, as you said it, got smoked like brisket.
Yeah.
Tell us more about what that was and why it's such a big deal.
I think the thing with Prop HH is that you have to remember that the governor made himself the face of this effort. The governor is Colorado's most popular political leader. His numbers are through the roof. This is a guy who won re-election last year by darn close to a 20% margin. So to have his signature ballot issue go down in flames a year later by 20 points, that's a 40-point swing. That's an enormous disconnect and shows just what utter contempt Colorado voters had for what was put in front of them with Prop HH. And
was it surprising to you that that margin was so big, considering the fact that Polis made himself the face of this?
Yes, absolutely. Now, the election day, I kind of gamed out, why might it pass, why might it fail? Why might it pass? Well, for starters, as we had explained, it was deceptively worded. When you looked at the ballot language, you might think it was a tax cut, right? But you got to remember, this is Colorado. If it's on the ballot, it's probably not a tax cut. It's probably a tax increase. They have to ask you for permission for those things. So it was deceptively worded. That worked in its favor. The proponents of it had money to spend, decent amount of money to spend, and they spent it with misleading ads, making false claims, saying things like, this is the only way to avert skyrocketing property taxes. That was false. But you know what? You put a bunch of TV ads in front of people making false claims, that can start to have a cumulative effect. And then also the fact that this is just a state that has moved solidly to the progressive left. Okay? Why might it fail? Off-year election demographics. Older, more conservative voters tend to turn out. Younger, more liberal voters tend to stay home. Why else might Prop HH fail? Coloradans have a history of voting down tax increases. Even as the state has moved to the left, still voting down tax increases. So that worked against Prop HH. And then the last factor that I highlighted on Election Day, working against Prop HH, is the fact that Democrats have been called out by us and others very clearly for how deceptive this was. And Colorado Democrats now have a history through Tabor refunds last year with the Colorado cash back, where they accelerated the checks, they gave more to lower income folks. They now have a history of whizzing on voters' legs and telling them that it's raining when it comes to taxes in Tabor. There's now a history of this. So I think there was some skepticism about, can we believe the governor when he says what this is? Can we believe Democrats when they say what this is? Because y'all tried to kill Tabor refunds, and then last year you expedited my check before Election Day with a letter from the governor, right? So I think there's some mistrust building. Did I think it was going to lose? My hunch was that it might lose narrowly. I never thought it would lose by 20 points.
So what do you think is going on in the Polis camp and the Democrats camp right now? What's next for not only Prop HH, but this overall movement, maybe shrink down Tabor? What happens next?
That's tough to tell because I'm a journalist, so I'm not inside their inner circles. You know what I mean? I guess I've never really heard the governor accept defeat on anything. Not so much in a I'm an eternal optimist kind of way, but in a you'll eventually come around to my way of thinking kind of way. So the problem for the governor is going to be, he has said, well, you know, what I'd really like to do is just lower the tax rate, and then we don't take in as much. Your Tabor refunds get smaller, that kind of thing. And the problem is Republicans are going to call us bluff, and they're going to say, well, let's get the legislature back and let's do it. You said you wanted that. So right now, this is all on Democrats, only because Coloradans have empowered Democrats to completely run state government, right? Like what? There's like 4 Republicans at the state capitol. There's more than 4, but there are functionally like four folks up there, and the rest of them are Democrats. They run the show. They run the state Senate. They run the state House. They got the governorship. So they're going to decide what happens next. They're going to decide if there's property tax relief passed before bills go out to voters. It's on them. That's the burden that they carry because they've won everything.
I guess more broadly, I kind of see this result, a clear rejection, yet again, as you mentioned, of a tax increase or a proposed one. Yet, 2022 midterms, you mentioned Polis wins by 19 points. Democrats run shop, as you mentioned, at this point. Is there a viable path forward for Republicans who are at their lowest levels of representation statewide, I believe, since pre-World War II?
Yep.
Is there a path forward of talking about kind of fiscal responsibility, maybe leaning away from social issues, for example?
Well, see,
I know that's
you lay out a very logical path forward for the Colorado Republican Party, whose leadership has made clear they are entirely disinterested in logic. And they've made clear that what they would rather do is embrace election deniers like Carrie Lake, who pretends to be the governor of Arizona. She headlined their big fundraising dinner over the weekend. Could Colorado Republicans run on fiscal conservatism and make gains in the state? Yeah, probably, right? Because the state's always been a little bit more fiscally conservative than the voting record would indicate. But it's like, you remember the Ron White joke where he's getting arrested for public intoxication, and he says, I had the right to remain silent, but I did not have the ability. Okay? All right. That's the Colorado GOP. They have the right to pursue that perhaps, a profitable way of going about things, but I don't know that they have the ability.
So that's, I guess, one of the challenges for them. But that said, maybe a more moderate Republican, although technically it was a nonpartisan race in Aurora, Mayor Mike Kaufman there kind of cruised to re-election. Was that an expected result?
He's sui generis, right? Mike Kaufman is Mike Kaufman. He is
his own brand.
He's his own political creature, right? He was somebody who shifted from being a fairly conservative Republican in the House to a moderate Republican in the House, clung to a seat longer than most Republicans would have been able to hold to it because he tacked with the district. He moved with the district. He gets bounced by Jason Crow in 2018. Was it that long ago? 2018, yikes. He gets bounced by Jason Crow, Democrat, in 2018, and he reinvents himself by running for mayor of Aurora. He grew up in Aurora. He's got long-time ties there. And here's the deal. Nobody outworks Mike Kaufman. People who dislike Mike Kaufman admire his work ethic. People who disagree with Mike Kaufman on every issue admire his work ethic and his constituent outreach and his constituent service. So that builds the dude a lot of goodwill. So he's running in Aurora, a city that he is known for his entire life, where people have known him for his entire political life. He has deep roots. He has deep connections. He has an organized political machine. He's one of the few places that Republicans can spend money and feel like they're going to get their money back, right? And he's running in an off year. Older, more conservative electorate. He also has a very resonant message right now, which is that crime and homelessness are out of control in Aurora. Like, he's got a very, very resonant message for the community. So I was not at all surprised that Mike Kaufman won. Surprised by his margin of victory? I don't know, maybe a bit. I mean, Democrats were running Juan Marcano, the city councilman, who, when he announced for the race, was a Democratic Socialist. He renounced his Democratic Socialist of Denver, DSA Denver credentials or association or whatever, when they failed to condemn the Hamas terror attacks in Israel. He said, I'm done with DSA as a result of that. But I mean, functionally, he's a Democratic Socialist, right? My thought, well, no offense to Juan Marcano, he's a good representative for his beliefs, is a city going to go from years, decades of moderate Republican leadership to a Democratic Socialist? That feels like a tough leap. You know what I mean?
Farm.
Yeah, and my thought was the year that Democrats think that they've got a really good chance of winning the Aurora mayor's race, which again, it's a municipal nonpartisan race, they may be more likely to put up kind of an anodyne business type Democrat, right? The kind of Democrat that wins in a place where Republicans normally win. like Adam Frisch in Lauren Boebert's district, right? He's a very kind of middle-of-the-road conservative Democrat. That, to me, seems like the bridge for Democrats to win in Aurora, not the idea that you're going to go from a former Republican congressman to a Democratic socialist.
Yeah, seems like a bridge too far in that case. A lot of school board races. I know that was
Yep.
something you highlighted here, Kyle. Any of those? I mean, I know DPS, Mike Johnston got some of his reform candidates through. Any other takeaways?
Well, I mean, listen, if Prop HH got smoked like brisket, the teachers union slate in DPS was like the full barbecue buffet. I mean, because they all got torched. So now, how much do we attribute that to the fact that Mayor Mike Johnston came in with the backing of his allies in the charter school movement and a ton of their bucks and put up TV ads, things like that? That probably has something to do with it. Yeah, I probably also had something to do with the fact that the teachers union held every single seat on the Denver school board, and the school board had become infamous for its dysfunction. They had to bring in somebody to like teach them how to talk to each other interpersonally. Like, they're the ones that they were confronted with deep school safety and security issues following a number of shootings, including the shooting of 2 deans at East High School. And what was the school board's response? They buried the whistleblower who came forward to 9 News. Like, that might have made the district feel good. That might have prevented other whistleblowers from coming forward. It does not appear that it assuaged the concerns of the community about school safety, right? So the at-large school board race, in which former East High principal John Youngquist came in with a safety and security message running against the union-endorsed Kwame Spearman. Last I saw, he was up by like 30 points? 30 points?
64-27 is what I last saw.
Again, think about that. The DPS school board, entirely teachers union controlled, and their candidate in the citywide race loses by a 30 spot? That suggests either Kwame Spearman is one of the worst candidates to seek public office since Kwame Spearman sought the mayoral office and dropped out of the race, or there's a really big concern about student safety in DPS, and voters wanted different voices on that board. Our political analyst, Alden Dillard, was saying last night, this is something I hadn't thought of, it's not just bringing 3 new voices onto the board. You drive around Denver and you see folks with those signs that say, resign DPS board. They want the entire board to resign. The entire board's not going to resign. But the threat is that like they could recall them, right? You know, recall an entire board, that's expensive and difficult, and it's just not going to happen. But now that you have 3 seats, could you pick off a couple more? And Alton was saying that could really change the dynamic in that room. It's not just, well, now there's a 3-vote reformer minority on the board, but there's also the more credible threat of a recall that could flip the majority on that board. The other thing that you have to bear in mind is that one of the voices leaving that boardroom is Board Vice President Ayante Anderson, who decided not to run for re-election. There was a poll by a business group that showed that he had a 9% approval rating, which looks great on your lapel, does not look great on paper. So he decided he's not going to run for re-election to the school board. He's going to run for the District 8 State House seat being vacated by Leslie Herod, a Democrat, when she leaves due to term limits. He kind of ran the show in those board meetings. His voice leaving the room may also change the conversation.
I want to stick with Tay Anderson for a quick second because he put out a statement on Wednesday morning, day after the election, saying that he promised, quote, a peaceful transition of power. And we're talking about a school board race. What's going on with that?
That's tough to tell. I mean, the take from a number of other Democrats who were talking about it on social media this morning, where Tay Anderson posted it, is that that kind of talk from him reflects delusions of grandeur. You know, again, it's a school board race. I don't think that anybody realistically thought that, you know, an armed mob was going to storm DPS headquarters to keep Tay Anderson in power. Pardon me, Ayante Anderson in power. So I think, you know, I think throughout his political career, he's not suffered from a lack of confidence. And I think that that's probably a reflection of that as well. And now it's on to the District 8 Democratic primary, where I think he stands a very decent chance, if for no other reason than he's a very well-known name, thanks in part to the Republicans who despise him and talk about him constantly. Right? I mean, like, what name appears in the Denver Gazette more frequently than Ayante Anderson, right? I mean, they are his PR machine. It's all negative, but they are his PR machine. So he's going to join a Democratic primary for State House District 8, in which you're going to have, I think there's 4 or 5 candidates at this point. There could be more than that. In a crowded race, somebody with name ID and a bit of a following could actually do pretty well. But we'll see. Maybe Democrats have kind of tired of his way of doing business. He's a few years removed now from some big activist wins that he had during the summer of 2020 following George Floyd's murder. Like the changing the Stapleton neighborhood name to Central Park. That was something that he had pushed for. So we're a few more years removed from those wins. But it'd be interesting to see how that race turns out, and to see, what do Democrats think of Anderson when the option is other Democrats who share a lot of the same beliefs.
Interesting. We'll see that as it moves forward.
Yep.
Other school board races, any other Prop II, any other big takeaways that we saw on Tuesday night?
Prop II, I honestly didn't realize that anybody was following that at all until the governor wanted to talk about it last night after his Prop HH got smoked. He's like, how about that II, huh? Yeah, that II that everybody was paying a lot of attention to. No, I mean, II allows them to keep extra sin tax, nicotine tax to spend on pre-K. This, again, relates to the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. They got in more money than they thought they were going to, so they had to ask to keep it. They're going to get to keep it. Not a big deal. Voters overwhelmingly approved that. And then I think the thing that you saw in some other school board races around the state is that the wave that brought a lot of conservatives onto school boards did not necessarily continue. Like there wasn't a second red wave onto school boards. More progressive candidates won back a number of seats, or at least held steady their proportions on the board. And that's vital, because Colorado Republicans who have said there's no real path to winning statewide races, candidate-based races, for a couple of cycles, is what they'll usually honestly admit. They said instead we're going to run nonpartisan school board races. We're going to get conservatives on school boards. That's going to be our bench for the future. That's how we're going to develop candidates for the future. So you got a lot of money, time, energy, treasure from conservatives being put into these school board races, running on cultural issues like, restrictions on LGBTQ students and restrictions on what American history can be taught and book bans and things like that. And it appears that those issues were definitely resonant a couple years ago and maybe resonant to a certain point, but aren't necessarily the animating force to just take over school boards left and right like it seemed like they might be a couple years ago.
Any other final takeaways from what we saw, maybe from a broad perspective about what I mentioned about maybe Colorado having a bit of that still purple hue despite the fact that it's clearly moved left, as you talked about?
Yeah, I think, what Republicans are hanging their hats on is the fact that Mike Kaufman won and that Prop HH was lit on fire and pushed over a cliff by voters. And I feel like you can make a very good case that both of those instances are pretty tough to extrapolate out, in the sense that Mike Kaufman has always kind of been a little bit of a unicorn. He's always outperformed where you would think other Republicans would in situations, if that makes sense. And I think Prop HH, we may never know why voters demolished it the way that they did. Did they do that because they don't want property tax relief? I'd kind of doubt that. Did they demolish it because it was just too confusing? Did they demolish it because they felt it was deceptive? Did they demolish it because they, wanted a different type of solution? Did they demolish it because they love their Tabor refunds? I don't know. Like, there's so many different things baked into that pie. It's really tough to pull it out. So Republicans going, well, I know why they turned down HH. It's because they love their Tabor refunds. That could be true, but it could be some other things. Because, man, we heard anecdotally from a lot of Democrats that said, I don't like Tabor, but this is sneaky business. It's complicated. It's deceptive. I don't like it. I want them to unwind this. I don't like the way it was shoved through at the last second through legislature. So it's really tough to get a read on who gets to take credit for the 20-point whooping. I'm sure lots of people will. But the imperative thing to remember on a go-forward basis is that the Democrats who now control the governor's mansion and the legislature have to figure out if they're going to try to come up with a quick fix here in the next couple of weeks. The ball is in their court. So Republicans can sit back and go, oh, that's quite the drubbing that you got there. Here's our ideas. Democrats are under no obligation to consider any of those ideas. But it is incumbent upon them to figure out whether they're going to try to put through a fix.
Well, we'll find out in the next couple of weeks.
Yep.
Kyle Clark, thanks for hopping up into the box and joining us.
Always good. Always good to be in the box.
Kyle Clark, thanks for joining us here on 90s Plus.